And we're back again, week 17 from the blue corner. My name is Dennis. It's taken 17 weeks for me to realize that you actually have to tell people to like, to subscribe, you know, all that good stuff. So this is it. I'm letting everyone know. Also give it a share. But we'll get straight on to today's episode. Today's guest is a good friend of mine. He actually coached me for my one and only fight. We might get into that, maybe not, maybe. He's got a boxing record of 6-0, a Muay Thai record of 10-0, and he's got a mixed martial arts record of 9-5 with 1 no contest, even though he claims it was still a loss. I'm talking about the one, the only, Richy Walsh. How have you been, and how has 2020 been treating you?
Yeah, good. Obviously, 2020 has been interesting for everybody, I think, and you know, I'm no exception, having been back in Australia since January, living the last 3 years in China and Asia. So, yeah, 2020 has been a bit of an up and a down, but you know, also a good year. I've just had you know, my daughter born, so first bub, and a lot of things happening, as you can imagine.
So first time father, and it's funny that you come this week, because I was actually going to say, like, what was more nerve-wracking, right? I kind of feel like we're in fight week, and the reason I say that is that you're actually going to have your Father's Day debut this Sunday. You know, so yeah, how does it feel that you're actually going to be able to celebrate, I guess, you know, Father's Day?
I mean, I haven't given it too much thought this weekend about Father's Day, but I'm just getting my head around being a dad, you know, and you know, those late nights changing nappies and getting up is all a trip, you know, and you know, in my head, you know, sometimes I still feel like I'm 15 or I'm 20 or I'm 22, but I'm not, you know, I'm a dad, I'm there. It's kind of surreal, and it's definitely been you know, the best experience of my life, surpassing anything that I've done before. You know, whether it be fighting, anything else, this is it, you know, this is the pinnacle.
And is it everything that you expected it to be, or you know, did you go into it like, I mean, you obviously have 9 months to prepare, right? So did you go into it, you know, thinking it was going to be, I mean, everyone always talks about the late nights or the sleepless nights, so that's sort of a no-brainer. But is there anything that's kind of caught you off guard, like I guess with the amount of responsibility, or just anything? Like, was it the way you thought it would be, or yeah, as I say, has there been, you know, a few things that you're like, damn, I wasn't expecting
honestly
this.
I didn't know what to expect. You know, I mean, I did, a kid, but in terms of, you know, being a parent, I mean, I think it's all new, and till you experience that, there's only so much people can tell you about it. Definitely some sleepless nights, you know, big adjustment, but like we said before, because of this COVID-19, I've had the opportunity to be at home and be back in Australia and kind of take on that responsibility as a full-time dad with my wife. So it's probably been the best case scenario for bringing a child into the world. And yeah, like I said before, it's the best thing that's happened to me. It's probably the pinnacle of, you know, what you can do as as somebody on this earth.
I mean, Richard Cranny said that same thing. He was like, you know, being a parent and obviously a husband is like his lifelong sort of goals. Are you the type that, what are they called? Had like a reveal party and stuff, or are you the type that likes to have a surprise and you know?
No, I didn't have a gender reveal. We actually joke about this. You know, I've seen all sorts of gender reveals, and personally, I would find it a little bit embarrassing to do because I don't like that sort of attention on me or on anything that I'm kind of doing in my personal life as such. But I mean, I've seen some good ones. I've seen some people doing burnouts in cars with tyres that are coloured blue or pink, and you name it, I've seen it. But yeah, no gender reveal for me. We did find out the sex. You know, I've just had a baby girl, but we found out the sex at about 20 weeks or something like that. So for me, it wasn't a big deal to keep it a surprise or have a reveal, but you know, each to your own, I guess.
And it's funny because some of those reveals are actually, as you say, some of them are good, but I actually get like amusement out of the ones that go wrong, right? Like for whatever reason, like I've seen pinata ones and stuff, and like that person's missed the pinata and hit their partner and stuff like that, and it's just like, this is crazy. But it's funny that they've actually like made it into a thing now. Like I'm the same. I'm kind of like, I wouldn't really want a gender reveal. I mean, I'm one of those that I actually just want to be surprised. at birth. Like, that's just me.
I totally understand. But I had this conversation with my wife, and we both went, we're kind of indifferent on whether we know or not. So yeah, we may as well find out, and then we can start buying the right kind of clothes and whatever else. But a gender reveal wasn't on the agenda. That's all I can say. It's a little bit cringe for me.
So you've obviously been living in China for a while now, and you had the baby here. Was that to plan, or has that got something to do with obviously the COVID? Like, were you sent back? Like, what?
No, I mean, I came back for a holiday. Myself, my wife came back for a holiday in January, which was around Chinese New Year holiday. And at that stage, the COVID outbreak wasn't a thing. Wasn't a thing over here. Wasn't a thing in China. During my holiday out of here for 10 days, which I brought, my summer gear, my flip flops, whatever else. We kind of got the call from China that things are getting bad here and they're escalating. So we kind of got stuck out here and by no choice of our own had to, rent a place here. And we were planning on having the child back in Shanghai, and we had an obstetrician there, everything was to plan. And, we just kind of adapted and kind of had to stay fluid like a lot of people did in 2020 and had the child here. But it's turned out, to be a blessing in disguise because, like I said, I've got that time with my wife, my time with, my baby, and also family. Having the child here is definitely an advantage. Being home is sweet.
Which is an important one, like to have that family around. And it would have been worse the other way around. I mean, I had Dave Francis on a couple of weeks back, and he was saying even though they live in the same country, her family are in Adelaide, and because of the border restrictions at the moment, he said since they've had the kid, the mother's been able to come across once, but she had to do the 2-week quarantine and all that stuff. But the rest of the family still haven't even met the kid. So it's kind of, as you say, it really is a blessing. Have you had to then, obviously, when you say you've got an apartment here, have you had to keep your apartment over there too? So you...
Yeah, well, initially I did because I didn't know how long this thing was going to go on for. So we thought maybe 1-2 months we'd have to stay here. That turned into 3-4. Once I got to about 3 or 4 months, I was renting an apartment there for a lot of money each week. So I decided I'd send some people in there, pack up my stuff, put it in storage, and just kind of buy some stuff while I was here. So basically got online, bought secondhand tables, chairs, rented a place here and just made do, set up for the baby and kind of set our lives up here temporarily while working, online. Basically I've got a meeting every morning for the operations of the gym or the Performance Institute where I'm working and life goes on. I guess we've just adapted and, I eventually I will go back. But like I said, 2020.
It is, right? And I mean, I was actually going to ask that, like, are you like on permanent holiday at the moment, or they are getting you to still work while you're over here?
Still working. The operations of the Performance Institute, which we run in Shanghai, just started the start of the month, last month. So it's been up and running for 1 month. But whilst we've been in Australia, it's been awesome. The UFC have continued to look after all the staff and keep us busy. We've been working on a journal, which is the second volume of the UFC Performance Institute journal, kind of encompassing everything about MMA training. So we're trying to put that all out there on a public forum or online or a published copy. So, trainers, athletes, fans, everybody can kind of get involved and see what's involved in, training an athlete right from off camp, to fight camp, to recovery and everything that's involved, whether it be physiotherapy, sports science, skills training, periodization for fight camps, etc.
Yeah, nice. So we'll get onto the PI a little later down the track. I want to probably start at the beginning anyway. As I said, I read up a little bit about obviously your history and I had no idea you even had a boxing record, to be honest, or a Muay Thai record. I was like, damn, he was doing Muay Thai. I knew you did wrestling. I knew you did the jits. But then I came across as well that you studied a little bit for construction, law. So I just want to
dipping my toes in everything.
I basically wanted to start at the beginning. So which came first? Like, were you first an academic or?
Well, I wouldn't say I was ever academic, to a point academic, obviously. I started university straight out of school, started my undergraduate, and I just picked a course that I was mildly interested in construction and went to New South Wales University. But really, I'd started martial arts a couple of years prior to that, just before finishing high school. And my kind of passion at that time was, my brain was just busy thinking about martial arts. So I think doing the undergraduate for 4 years gave me an opportunity to, kind of hone my skills. I always say it was getting a degree in, construction, but my primary focus was my degree in martial arts. So that 4 years of, study was an opportunity to basically train morning and night. And, I first started learning Muay Thai, then boxing, jiu-jitsu, all kind of around a similar time, because my goal was to fight MMA. And obviously when you want to fight MMA, you've got to learn how to fight properly. And I guess the individual arts that encompass MMA are striking, wrestling, and some sort of grappling or ground game.
Someone who's done a bit of everything, like because they always talk about the new breed right now, right? Where basically you can train in MMA. Mm-hmm. Where back in the day, it used to be about, some people would be karate background, some people would be jiu-jitsu background. And I mean, that was the whole premise of the UFC was, let's put these guys up against each other and see which martial arts is the supreme, right? Where now it really is. You go to these schools and it's like, I'm training in MMA. Mm-hmm. But if we were to break it down, and I know that there's never a clear-cut answer, because you'll always get a champion that has still got the BJJ background or whatever. But, if a young kid is starting up and wanted to focus solely on one discipline, in your eyes, what do you think is like the best discipline to kind of have? I mean, I'll put it straight out. Like in my eyes, I always say wrestling. That's me, and I just find that I find with wrestling you dictate where the fight goes.
Absolutely.
Right?
I think it's a hard question, because over the period of 25 years of the UFC, we've seen that change. Initially, it was obviously jiu-jitsu with the Gracies. No one had seen that kind of ground game, and then that kind of changed to more of a wrestling. Ground and pound, sprawl and brawl, whatever you want to call it. And now we're kind of seeing it come full circle, where I think wrestlers or strikers who can wrestle are dominating, the proceedings or dominating the UFC fights. So in my opinion now, if you have a strong wrestling base, of course, but you need to be able to strike. And we're seeing wrestlers who can strike. And again, we're seeing fights that aren't going to the ground. And if they do go to the ground, it's popping back up to the feet very, very quickly. So in my opinion, the best bang for your buck would be to learn obviously a striking art. You have to be efficient and proficient on your feet. Otherwise you're never going to win a fight. But also you need to be able to wrestle. And wrestling doesn't just dictate the clinch, but it's also the getting up back to your feet. So if you can keep it in the range that you're comfortable with, ideally you're going to be have higher chance of winning that fight. But to answer your question, it's kind of a tricky one, because MMA is still based around athleticism, how competitive someone is, and obviously their skill sets. So that all kind of factors into what best suits you anthropomorphically. Are you tall and long, so you're going to be a good long striker? Are you powerful and got one punch knockout? Are you really explosive and isometrically strong? Are you suited to wrestling? So there's the individual aspect, and there's also the money ball. What's the best bang for your buck? What are people doing? What's the trend, and what's going to win you fights the quickest? Because we only have a finite amount of time to learn skills, right? And if we're starting a sport, we don't have 20 years to learn one art and 20 years to learn another. So, you've got to narrow down what you can learn and be more particular in what you're choosing. For example, if I wanted to be a good MMA fighter, I wouldn't necessarily now go into a first day white belt gi class and learn lapel chokes and a lot of techniques that aren't going to complement MMA. I'd be trying to fast track that and go to a wrestling class, learn how to box, learn how to kickbox, etc., and put it together and go to a gym that does that, and that way you're not you're cutting off the fat and you're kind of getting right to the point of what you want to do, the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, and I guess, what I was saying though about dictating where the fight goes, and I think that's why it's so important, is because, if you are faced with, say, a better striker, mm-hmm. right? As a wrestler, you are going to find a way to put it to the ground, right? And then you find someone who's maybe better at BJJ than you. As a wrestler, you're going to find a way to stand that thing back up, right? I just feel like it's that good. As I say, it dictates where the fight goes. The other thing that I find with the wrestling is a mindset. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is wrestling's not big over here. It really isn't. And I think that's a flaw in the Australian when you talk about the Americans coming up in their schooling system, they have so much
Well, they have the high school wrestling, collegiate wrestling. And one thing I definitely agree with you on is that mindset of wrestling is that grind. It's embracing that. It's that athleticism based with mental capacity. And I think that transfers into MMA very, very well, but it also transfers into the training of MMA, you know, the repetition based, the mindset. And with striking in MMA, if you're a phenomenal wrestler, which I will agree with you on this point, if you're a great wrestler and you can learn a competent level of striking, I think the intent of striking is actually more important than the technique. For example, you see very good wrestlers whose striking technique or pedigree is not that of anybody else who at a higher level, but they have power, they have speed, they have determination and want to land those strikes. And that counts for a lot, particularly when no one can take you down. And if you have a relentless kind of fitness level and the intent to land strikes, most of the time you will land them.
And for yourself, because as I say, like, we don't have that wrestling base over here, but I know you do a bit of wrestling. Mm-hmm. So coming up, where did you, I guess?
It was hard because there's limited amount of, there's some Europeans, some Russians that had been in Sydney that wrestled, and formerly I'd trained, my coach knew a bit of judo, so we started off there, and then I'd went to a few wrestling gyms around Sydney and did a lot of driving until I met my wrestling coach who I'd used for my UFC career, and before that Gary Jones, who was actually an American NCAA wrestler from New Jersey who'd came out here on a lifeguard exchange out of all things, and then met his wife and now married here with children. So that's how I was exposed to a high level collegiate style wrestling, or that folk style wrestling, was through Gary. So I'd seen him working with another gym or another fighter, actually Sonny Brown, and I contacted him. I think just inboxed him and said, look, I'd be interested in doing a lesson with your wrestling coach. Can you give me his details? And that's kind of how it happened. Sorry. And then Gary became, my wrestling coach and was involved with the gym that I trained at, and now he's running the Wrestling Foundation. If anybody wants to check him out, very, very good coach, very competent and accomplished wrestler.
And did you continue with the wrestling? Because you said you did your construction degree here at UNSW, mm-hmm. but your law you did. At Georgia Tech?
No, I did. I did part of my construction degree over a year in Atlanta, Georgia, for construction. I started very briefly a Juris Doctor, which is a law degree here in Sydney, and then quickly found out that I didn't want to read 40 hours a week and and go down that. And that was about the time actually when I started that degree. That was at UTS. That my coach Liam Reznikov was like, "Look, you're at a crossroads here. I think." Around the time I fought Callan Potter, he's like, we can really make a go of this and you can get into the UFC, or you can kind of call it quits now, keep studying, go down that route. So this is the crossroads you're at, and if you want to commit to trying to live that UFC dream, let's do it. Let's train every day, twice a day. Let's write down the goals and let's get it done. So that's when I decided that I wasn't going to do the postgraduate, that I was actually going to just focus on making the UFC. Then I strung 3 wins together, and then the Ultimate Fighter popped up, and that's just that's all she wrote.
Did the Ultimate Fighter come up that early? Because when I was looking at it, it looked like you went 9-1 before the Ultimate Fighter, right? Yeah. Basically, you had a really good record. I think the only loss you had on your record was
Robert Whittaker,
former champ Robert Whittaker.
And at
right?
the time, I was like, I can't believe I bloody lost to this guy. Who is this guy? But yeah, little did we know. We were so young, but little did we know we were going to both reach the UFC, and he was going to be the champion. At a higher weight division. So now it doesn't feel that bad when you lost to him. But yeah, I think it might have been 7-1 or 8-1, something like that, by the time I did make the Ultimate Fighter. But that was around the time I believe that I'd finished my degree. I might have been a year in between, and then I'd had 3 fights. I think I can't remember. One of the fights was Callan Potter, who was in the UFC, but he's obviously a little bit older. I'm losing timeline now. It seems so long ago, and when you get punched in the head, you can't remember these dates.
It's funny, every time I talk to someone from combat, Luke Jackson's a big one of that, boxer. Every time, we'll arrange to meet up or something, he'll forget and he'll be like, mate, I get punched in the head for a living, And
it's a good excuse.
It's a good excuse. You got to give it to him. So talking about the Ultimate Fighter though, it wasn't the Smasher series. You actually did the Tough Nations.
I did, yeah. I tried out for the Smashers, which was Robert Whittaker's series that he won. only to be a reserve on that. And I think, now it's coming back to me. That was the time then that I actually had to have a couple more wins. And then they did come back out with the Tough Nations, which was Australia versus Canada, filmed in Canada. And that was the one I tried out for and actually, was on the cast for that as a welterweight. So the first one I did try it for was only a reserve. Second one was on that series, and that was in Canada. So that was my start in the UFC, and that was the opportunity that I wanted and needed to get on that stage.
So being that it was filmed in Canada, was the tryouts in Canada, or was the tryouts still here?
Yeah, the tryouts were both. I think the Australian team, the tryouts were in Sydney, so we had people flying from all over the country to try out here. And in Canada, it was the same scenario. They had a tryouts in, maybe they had East and West Coast, I'm not sure, but they had the tryouts over there. And once they'd got the cast together, we were kind of, assembled, flown out to Canada, where we do the filming in Montreal, Quebec, or it was a town outside of Montreal in the countryside. It was like a big log cabin. It was snowing. It was the full, Canadian ideal kind of setting outdoors. So it was really, really cool and unique experience. But again, imagine 8 weeks, no phone, no TV, no communication with family. You don't know these bunch of 7 other smelly dudes you're living with, and you're fighting the other team, and you train about 3 hours a day. Your coaches are hammering you, and it was all quite overwhelming. I enjoyed it, and I kind of got behind it, but I could see how some people would go nuts and not enjoy that kind of situation.
And is it an invitational kind of tryout, or is it something that you apply for? Because with some of these reality TV shows, it's like, we're film. I don't even know, like American Ninja or Australian Ninja. We've got our own series now, and they say, we're filming this, send your demo tapes in or whatever. Or is it that, the UFC actively look at, what's going on in the regional scene, and they send you an invite rather than how does that all work?
That one was definitely a tryout type scenario, but you had to have at least 3 professional fights. You had to have a video reel. You had to be accepted to come to the tryouts. There was some sort of criteria, if I do recall, for actually trying, for coming to the selections and kind of going through the process or the rigors. If I can recall, it was, there was a grappling component to it where they kind of matched us up with somebody for a 3-minute grappling round. They wanted to look at your skills there. There was a pad holding section where they watched you kick and watch you, hit mitts. And then there was some interviews. So it wasn't solely based on skills or record. It was a combination of skills, technically, your record in MMA, and also, I guess, how you interviewed and what you were kind of going to bring to the show. Obviously they're still going to make TV. So it was an interesting experience. I still remember the tryouts was, you got there and it was the who's who of Australian MMA, big dudes, ugly ears, intimidating.
Well, you had Dan Kelly on your series, right?
I had Dan Kelly.
I think Jake Matthews as well, right?
Yeah, Jake Matthews, Daniel Kelly, to name a few. And, I didn't know either of them well before the series, but afterwards we were very, very good mates. So you imagine if you're in a house, obviously, with 8 weeks with a group of guys, you're going to know them pretty well by the end of it. So we've continued that friendship, especially with those 2 guys and Brendan O'Reilly, till now, and we still talk regularly. But yes, they were at the tryouts. I think at the time Daniel was 36 or 37 when he was first in the UFC. So he may have been 36 at the tryouts. You imagine he's already done 3 Olympics and decided he wanted to try his hand at MMA and continue that till he was 40. It was a pretty late start for him. Jake at the time was maybe 20. So he was one of the youngest to make the UFC roster when he did it, 20 or 21. So yeah, it was crazy experience, and some good friendships were forged and still remain to this day.
And I guess, was it hard to be in that sort of, I'll compare it to the Winter Warrior experience, right? Where I always say, which is tougher, not knowing anything about your opponent, or being, in your case, for us it was just we were training together, but for you were actually trapped in the same house. Which do you find harder? And I only say that because, like, for my sort of series, like, I was like, damn, like, it's hard. It's kind of good because over the time you can kind of like eye out, they're good at this. I could maybe get them here. I could do this.
Sure.
But on the other token is you start to form friendships, right? Yeah. And then suddenly you might be paired off against each other, and it's like, oh, because you hear about, like, when you see what happened with was it Rashad Evans and John Jones, right?
Yep.
In a camp, all of a sudden they both want the title, and it just totally destroyed that kind of relationship.
Absolutely. I think I didn't have either of those problems because I didn't get to see the Canadians train, so I couldn't kind of ascertain how or who I was fighting and what their skill set was like. The second was we didn't actually become too close to the Canadians friendship-wise, so I didn't have those two problems. But the problem that I did have was, yes, I was in the house with them the whole time. There's the unknown of how good they are, how they've been training, and you're seeing that person you're fighting every day. And I know you would have felt the same. It's a little bit, uncomfortable for me, especially. I would rather almost not watch their tapes, not know who I'm fighting that well, and just go fight. The sitting around and the seeing the opponent and the whole hoorah that goes with fighting was something that I didn't necessarily enjoy. I actually enjoy, the competition side of it and being in there in that moment, that kind of flow state, that fight or flight, those nerves and that accomplishment that you feel after you fight. The whole lead up to it and the everything that's involved with it, to me is actually a bit sickening. So that's why it's kind of nice to now be coaching and take my experience from that and pass it on to other people rather than being in there in the center of the limelight myself, because the pressure that I felt from myself was enough to take years off my life. Certainly lost my hair.
And talking about the coaching side of things, like how did you enjoy the difference there? Because I assume when you weren't on the tough, I'm sure you had other fighters come out of your camp or whatever. But usually when you have a fight lined up, the attention is on you for whatever it is, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Where something like tough, I mean, how did that all change? Like, because obviously, how many were on Team Australia?
There was four welterweights, 4 middleweights, so there's 8 total.
Right, and how many coaches?
There would have been 3. We had 3 coaches.
So do you feel like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Did I get enough attention? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not so much the attention, like, because I'm not saying like you're an attention seeker, but like just having that, where. You're not the only one fighting. It is kind of like the attention, right? So like we're going to find sparring partners for you specifically. This, and get you ready for your fight. Where all of a sudden you're in a household where now everyone's getting ready, everyone's got to fight, and the coach's time, I guess, is very limited to what they can actually give you.
Yeah, I definitely don't think the Ultimate Fighter was ideal for anybody because you kind of. You're subject to your coaches that you have and their idea of a training camp with 8 randoms and how they can make you win. So there wasn't so much research into, Rich, what was your training camp before you came on The Ultimate Fighter? Did they watch all my videos? Did they know my style? Do they know me? Do they know how I fight? Do they know what I need? Do they know your personal needs, your psychological needs, etc.? I don't think you have that home advantage in terms of your own coach being there in your corner and that attention that you probably need. So yeah, I definitely think that was testing. I thought that we trained too much. The emphasis was on training hard, and I don't know if it was for the camera, it was for people just want to train hard, but the training was too hard in my opinion. It was 8 weeks of getting the guts flogged out of us, no periodization, no taper, and you could fight at any moment. There should have been a conversation. If I was coaching the Ultimate Fighter or anything, it would be, okay, Dennis, you've come here. What was your training before? Are you fit? Are you in shape? Are you ready to go? Are you carrying an injury? What would you like to do? We have 8 weeks here. Would you like to focus on striking? Would you like to do a little bit on your own? How do you like to prepare for a camp? How do you like to cut weight, etc.? So I think there was not many of those questions being thrown around, and I think that would have been more beneficial if everybody, especially coaching, knew exactly what each individual needed. That was probably the biggest concern for me. By the time I got out of the Ultimate Fighter, I was absolutely wrecked. Like my body was just in a total limp mode. Like, it was injuries, sore, everything.
And for that, do you try to stay on weight the whole time, or are you going up and down?
In the Ultimate Fighter or outside?
In the Ultimate Fighter.
No, in the Ultimate Fighter, I never had a problem with my weight. I was always pretty close to welterweight anyway. Like I only cut 4 to 5 kilos. I was never a big welterweight in terms of weight. So I didn't have the issue of yo-yoing up and down in weight. I always stayed consistent. So for me, if anything, it was being too light was an issue. And I know for other people, not knowing when you're going to fight within an 8-week period is a little bit concerning, especially if you are big and you just get notice on, 3 or 4 days that, hey, you're fighting, and you have to make weight. But for me, that wasn't an issue. So if anything, it was keeping that weight up so I could train properly because we just did so much volume of training then that we were all losing weight.
And I have to ask, what they always say, and people always come out with reality TV, afterwards. Oh, they painted me in this way, or they painted me in that way. How much of the Ultimate Fighter, I guess, is what you see, and how much of it do you feel like was set for production? Like, were there ever any moments where the production crew would come and go, "Listen, we need to film X, or we need to film Z," or were they more just flies on the wall?
And more flies on the wall in terms of the Ultimate Fighter. I feel like in other reality TV shows, they make the drama and that's what sells it. Maybe in the UFC, I think initially in the Ultimate Fighters, there was definitely some more action. The ones that I remember watching when I first was introduced to martial arts were a little bit more exciting, I think, than maybe ours. Like, I feel like the Canadians and Australians were so amicable and everybody was friends. I was like, oh, this is a little bit boring. Somebody needs to fight each other in the house or something.
Well, I think it's because both of our cultures, Canadians are really good, cool
Correct.
people, right? And we're kind of like laid back as well. So I think, did they have alcohol in the house?
Yeah, they had alcohol, but again, we just had a lot of, there was one bloke from our team, Tyler, that definitely, had a few drinks. But besides that, there wasn't that many guys who were crazy. I think if they wanted to cast it and not pick the best fighters, definitely you could get a bit of that. If I was casting it, I'd probably pick a couple of loose cannons and put them in there just for, comedic value or, some drama. But we actually probably had, a real good mix of people. And one of the Canadians ended up being my main training partner for the majority of my UFC fights. So I'd say we got along better than anybody planned.
So what, you would bring him over to Australia for your camps?
Yeah, there was a guy in there who actually made the final, Sheldon Westcott. And I used to bring him over for all the UFC fights just as part of my training camp. Just fly him over and put him up in my house, and we'd train every day for 4 or 5 weeks. So he was another person that helped me a lot throughout my kind of career and helped me upskill, I guess, with wrestling and grappling. Just a real phenomenal grappler. And if you watch him on The Ultimate Fighter, he won by submission. He beat Daniel Kelly with a Von Flue choke, and actually he may have got 2 Von Flue chokes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. So very, very strong submission guy. And he used to come over every fight camp.
Do you think that's important over here? Like, as in, when I do my trips over to Vegas and stuff, like, I'm always amazed at, like, you go to Extreme Couture or you go to Syndicate or whatever, and there's just so many fighters there, right? And to some degree, it's like actually really funny to watch because you see their pro sparring sessions, and it's like, it's something that I've never seen over here, right? Like,
Yep.
come out of there kind of shocked. I'm like, oh, they're trying to kill each other. But do you find that, it's important to fly these guys across? Or do you think we're starting to get to a point where there's enough talent in the country? I was talking to Janae Harding last week, and, when she started, she was the only girl, for instance, in her fight camp. She was one of the original ones there. Where now they do have these sessions where they've got, 10, 12 girls and stuff. So it is growing. But do you think we're at a point now where we've got enough talent in the country? Or do you still think, you need to be traveling either to the States or bringing some people over?
I think we probably do have enough talent. Whether the talent is working together is another thing. I know in New Zealand they have city kickboxing, and it looks like
they're doing real well.
Yeah, Eugene Behrman over there has got a good little crew of guys who help each other out. I think the big problem we have here is, and I experienced this myself, is that the team was kind of built around myself fighting. So then I had these training partners, and when I wasn't fighting, there was nobody else fighting, and the sessions kind of fluctuated up and down. I used to have to bring in, we'd meet up with Alex Volkanovski or Robert Whittaker or some of these guys, and we'd all get together and do these super sessions, which was good, but there was still a little bit of disconnect, and more probably on a geographical scale in terms of, Alex lived down south and Robert lived, southwestern Sydney, and I lived up, north. So it was more like trying to get the quality of training partners together in one place was very hard. I think in Melbourne, they're starting to get that with Daniel Kelly's gym down there in Resilience. where they have a lot of UFC fighters and top-level guys working together in combination with other gyms. If they need a better striking coach or whatever it is, they bring somebody in. So I think we're not far off it. And it's a bit of a shame. I think when I first started, the gyms did separate, and it was a bit of that kind of, we stick to ourselves, we look after ourselves. But I think people realised if they want to be better and Australia wants to kind of put themselves on the map, that we need to train together and just kind of take away that hostility between gyms. So I think, to answer your question, I've seen it in New Zealand, I've seen it in Melbourne. I'm seeing decent fight teams here, but I'm yet to see like a stable of top fighters. Do I think you need to be in a stable of 10 or 20 fighters? No. Do you need to have 2 or 3 good training partners? Yes. Do you need to have a bunch of training partners that you're probably better than? Yes. Safe training partners? Yes. You go to some gyms and flip a coin, it could be dangerous. You could go there and from overseas and they could want to light you up. I've had good experience. I went to Uriah Faber's gym, and although he didn't have as many big guys, he looked after me. We had good training partners, but I've seen both sides of it. Robert Whittaker would probably tell you, if you speak to him, he went overseas and didn't have as good experience in terms of what he wanted and what he got. And now he has a great team here with Alex Prates, in Gracie Hamaita, Smeet and Grage. So it's a catch-22. I think you need to go overseas to see what they're doing and upskill potentially in terms of wrestling, like we talked about before. But Australia's jiu-jitsu, if you can find it, our wrestling, of course, you only need one good coach. Our striking's always been top level, and I think Australians are, developing MMA quicker than anywhere else. It's just that we've got that sporting culture and that want to be better. So to answer your question, I don't think we need to be in part of a big team, whether it be Extreme Couture or ATT. Does it hurt to go overseas and train with the best or with the biggest teams? No, it definitely doesn't. But you need to have a coach who's, obviously looking out for you, getting the right sparring partners at the right time. I see too many people just sparring hard day in, day out, and that's gonna take its toll. Unless you're the best guy in the gym, you're eventually going to get hurt. You're going to get knocked out in the gym. You're going to lose your chin. You'll be injured. So there's times to spar hard, and there's times to spar moderate, and then there's times to not spar. And I think people need to be told sometimes when that is and how that looks, because if it was up to fighters, we'd train hard every day and we'd spar every day, and we probably wouldn't spend enough time drilling and doing the little things. So the communication parts, what makes a good coach and what makes a good team is, the quality of people and the atmosphere, I think, more so than the talent of skill.
And in your eyes, what makes a good, training or sparring partner? And, what do you think are the qualities of like a good training partner? Is it someone that, for instance, pushes you to your limits, or is it someone that allows you, that maybe tapers off a little bit to allow you to, what's more important?
I think depending on where you are in your fight camp and where you are in your skill development, sometimes you'll want somebody who is, not as good as you, so you can try new skills that you're learning in, say, for example, if I don't have a fight coming up or my athletes don't have a fight coming up and they're in the off-camp phase, meaning that we don't have a fight scheduled. So let's just say, for example, the off-camp goes between general prep and specific prep and back and forth in 3-week blocks. If they're in the off-camp phase, in any part of that, they might be learning new skills or focusing on weaknesses, not necessarily winning those rounds. And in order to upskill and learn new skills, you need to tone the sparring down, I believe, to a moderate level. So you're not scared and you don't have that fear of trying new things. But also that needs to be reiterated to training partners. So there needs to be an agreed level of sparring. Hey guys, we're sparring at level X today. That means that I can try new techniques without the fear of getting hurt, but also I can try new techniques and work on my weak areas. Otherwise I won't have a chance, because when it comes to fight camp, it's very much focused on winning, not learning. The level of sparring naturally is going to go up because you have this fearful event coming up and you want to be in the best shape, and everything just, your senses, everything is just starting to peak. So yeah, there's definitely an element of having training partners who are, can go the level you're going and match you so you can improve, and when it's ready to go fight camp, that they can pick it up. So you need training partners, in my opinion, that are minus, so someone whose skill level is less than yours, someone who's equal, and someone who's a plus. And depending on where you are in the fight camp or off camp will depend on where you will utilize those people. I think in the start of the fight camp, let's say I have a fight 8 weeks from now, it's probably important to have some hard rounds in that initial 3-4 weeks, some hard sparring sessions, and then you start to taper off. Obviously, taper off with the volume of training as you peak towards a fight is natural, but also as you're getting towards that fight, I would start to pre-frame training partners. For example, 2-3 weeks out, when I want my fighter who's done his hard rounds, his fitness is great, he's in a great mind space, I want him to be confident in his skills. So I might say to the training partners, hey, mimic this fighter that he's fighting or do this. So it'll give my guy who's fighting or girl a certain look and give a desired result, be it confidence, practicing a certain position, or practicing on someone who's matching or mimicking their opponent. If that makes sense.
It does. And I have to say, like, sparring is tough, man. Like, and I mean that, like, obviously with my journey that you were a part of, you know, there were days that you would leave the gym and you'd be on top of the world. And I was literally, I was like, you could put me against, say, Jared, who was the light heavyweight, you know, and I'll be like, I'll take him, you know, like, because you really come out of there feeling really good for whatever reason. And then you go in the next day or 2 days later and you just feel like you're not ready, you know, and it is a real, like, mental mind, whatever you want to call it. You
definitely get hit with a bit of adversity when you're sparring. And I feel as though, I don't know if it's getting punched in the head that brings up those feelings of, you know, being overwhelmed or emotions or whatever it is. But you have to go through that. And I think there's a point, and that's why I said you get those hard sparring sessions out in the first part of fight camp, because I think it's important that people have that adversity. They don't always feel like, oh, you know, I had an easy sparring session my whole way to fight camp. To the fight, and then they get to the fight and they get hit with their first part of adversity and they crumble. So I think there's definitely a part of fight camp where the sparring needs to be as close to fight scenarios as it can, obviously with no open elbows or knees or, you know, crazy techniques. But people need to be tested. They need to be shark tanked. They need to be put through the rigor to make sure that they've experienced that mental duress, that when they come to the end of fight camp and they're building their confidence and they go to fight, that if something does, or a spanner gets thrown in their works, or the opponent moves a certain way they didn't expect, or they get hurt, that they can bounce back from that. So that's the resilience that you kind of develop in fight camp. And like you alluded to, there's hard times in fight camp. There's times when you go to sparring, and I know myself when I went to sparring and I feel like leaving there crying because you lost, you got beat up. And you kind of feel like you're like, I'm not going to come back tomorrow. Like you literally, you're like, am I a fighter or am I just a little bitch? Because, you know, maybe I should go get a job. You know, down there doing something else is a little easier. You know, this fighting stuff, maybe I'm not cut out for it.
And this is where I think the wrestling comes back in. And this is what I was saying about the mindset. Like I just find, once again, the wrestlers now, they leave there. And they're like, I'm back tomorrow.
But do you think wrestling teaches you a tough mindset, or do you think that wrestling attracts tough people?
I think it could be a bit of both, but I do definitely, and I had this conversation with someone probably like 2 years ago, and I mean, look, I'm not going to say it's 100% correct, and I forgot who I had the conversation with, but it kind of went down the theory of, say, let's take jiu-jitsu, right? Jiu-jitsu, you can tap, right? So mentally in your mindset, it says when the going gets tough, there's an out, right? So you know what I mean? Like it ingrains that into your mindset. It's like, and like the other flip of that is like, I'd rather not break my arm and see to fight another day. So like, I'm not trying to like say that's a bad thing, but it does ingrain that if something gets tough, like there is the out.
For sure.
Obviously, you'll still get the strong people that'll be like, I'll black out before I tap out. You definitely do get that. But with the wrestling, especially in the States, when they talk about that, you know, you don't even just have one wrestling match. Sometimes in these tournaments, the guys are like having 5-6 wrestling matches in the one, you know, and when it comes to the weight cutting and everything, it's just a grindy sport, like it just really is. And I think there is no way out. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, like you're there to grind.
Sure.
And I think, so yes, tough people gravitate towards wrestling, but I do think like in that sort of comparison, you know, I've never seen someone say, yeah, well, if the going gets tough in wrestling, you know, just throw in the towel or whatever. It's just like stick with it, grind it out, keep going, you know, put your head down, as they say in the striking, I guess, bite down on your mouthpiece and go for it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. But yeah, then again, I just wonder is that wrestling's not as popular these days, and I wonder is it because it's just tough and only the tough kind of survive it. There's definitely an aptitude for wrestling. You know, you have to be physical. It's a physical sport. You have to be fit. You have to grind. You have to be somewhat strong or flexible. But also there's that mental aptitude where you have to be, you know, back and forth. You have to get up. You have to be fit. You know, it all accounts for something. And I think more so than jiu-jitsu and the other arts, wrestling seems to have many, many tough people. And I don't know, again, if it was nature or nurture, you know, if it's their background or where they're from, or is it necessarily just that they're athletic, you know, phenoms. And I think it's a mixture of both. I think we can agree on that. And we definitely see some of the best fighters coming from that, you know, college wrestling or Dagestan pedigree, where they have that grind and then they learn how to strike. And like I said, because I believe striking is intention more than it is technical. So they don't need 10 years to learn how to be a technically proficient striker. They just need to know how to throw an overhand right and knock your head off. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing great wrestlers who have great grind, fitness for days, and can punch. And they can take a punch, you know, and that's ultimately why a lot of them are left standing at the top of the pile. And I think we'll continue to see that. And in my opinion, if I were to train any style or anything, like you said, it would be wrestling and striking. So, you know, practice your get-ups, practice your cage defense, your anti-clinch to stay striking, or if you want to stay in the clinch, but that style, because I think that the jiu-jitsu, you know, hold somebody down, pass them, get to mount, tap them with an arm lock, I think those days are few and far between, as you probably see with the percentage of UFC stoppages and finishes from mount or, you know, leg locks or anything like that. Competition jiu-jitsu and MMA are going two different ways.
Yet I still find that getting the submission is more satisfying than getting a knockout, which is kind of weird, right? And,
I mean, I love it. I love watching the leg locks in the UFC, and if you get somebody who can do it at that level, I mean, that's impressive.
So anyway, going back, so we finished tough. You made the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
How many fights did you end up having there? Like 5, right?
Six. I actually don't know. 6, 5.
They're all one big blur.
Yeah, it's a bit of a blur. Hold on, let me just think. Yeah, 5. You're right.
Is there one that was a highlight? Probably Melbourne, right? For 193.
Melbourne 193. I mean, look, I think my career, if I'm being very honest with myself, was up and down, and I think possibly a little bit premature to get into the UFC in terms of how long I'd been fighting and my development as a fighter mentally. You know, I feel like if I had the mindset that I do now, with the skill that I have now, entering the UFC would be a totally different thing. Do I want to fight now? No. Did I want to fight?
I was going to say, so on that, do you ever get the itch though again?
No, not really. Like, I might watch a fight and then I remember how hard it is when you're in there. As you know, when you get in there and you feel those nerves, that's not for everybody. And I think everybody feels those nerves. It's a matter of how you react in that situation. And in the cage definitely was something that's addicting, but the outside and the lead up to it and the trying to manage your own personal life and friends and family and have a balance for me was not really there and not enjoyable. The process, you got to enjoy the process, I think. And I wasn't enjoying the process in the end as much as I was in the beginning. And, you know, it certainly got to do with wins and losses and a matter of, you know, is this going to work out or not going to work out, etc. So at some stage you got to decide which path you want to take, and for me that led to coaching. I mean, when you give 10 years to professional fighting, you know, and you enjoy it and you enjoy training, after a certain point I started to lose that kind of that desire to train again and want to be the best. So I took a step back and discovered that, you know, coaching and just doing it for fun, which is what I did it for at the start, was much more enjoyable and gave me a different perspective on the whole thing. In terms of career, I mean, highlights probably, fighting in UFC 193 in front of 57,000 people in Melbourne was definitely a highlight. But it's just taken me.
And you got the W on that
and
one.
I
I was actually down in Melbourne. I was down in Melbourne for that one, I remember that one.
And I got the W. And look, it took me around the world. Took me to Japan. Took me to Canada. Everywhere training, and the people that I've met and the places that I've been. Money can't buy that.
And which do you prefer? Do you prefer fighting on home turf, or do you like seeing the world? And I guess the payoff there is seeing the world. Jet lag, travel,
exactly.
All of that comes with it. Where fighting at home, I guess you got a little more pressure because like you've got to defend the turf. You've got family and friends going.
Fighting at home was a little bit actually harder. Logistically, it was easier. I didn't have to fly an extra coach overseas. I could do my camp here. There was no allowance. We try to allow a day for each hour of time zone difference. So there wasn't those type of things to worry about. But like you said, I think I perform better when I have more pressure, and I had more pressure being out of my comfort zone overseas. So besides when I fought in Los Angeles and didn't go so well, but in Japan and I felt like being the underdog and fighting overseas is an opportunity to step up to the plate and prove yourself. And that's probably a regret of mine, is not taking more fights overseas. I had the opportunity to take fights overseas, but opted for the home fights. Again, there's the question of, are they going to give you favourable matchups if you're a hometown fighter? Are they not? And it depends where you are in the pecking order, I think, and how experienced and what kind of value you give to the company or the promotion, because at the end of the day, it's a business.
And fighting overseas, what was the hardest thing for you there? Was it the time zone thing? Was it you sometimes hear about like people talking about like food, right? Because you go
food.
to it.
Food for me, because not so much in Los Angeles or Canada. Well, Canada was a bit different, but in Japan, particularly when I hadn't been to Japan, I went to fight in Tokyo. We were staying at a nice hotel, the Hilton, in the center of town, and it was just a little bit tricky getting food because a lot of the food was covered in they salt a lot of their meat and being
not good for weight cuts, right?
Not good for weight cuts, and particularly then 2014, I didn't know that much about weight cutting, and by the time that my career ended, I knew a lot about nutrition, a lot about weight cutting, a lot about periodization, scheduling, etc. All these things, mental side of it, which I just had no idea, and sometimes I wonder, was I better off not knowing? But as a coach, it's obviously better to know.
So now, on that though, now knowing that, when they sometimes talk about like the fight game being 90% mental, 10% obviously the physical side of things, when it comes to dieting, how much do you think that plays a role? Like, obviously, you had like Dolce make a big name for himself and stuff because he became this elite dietitian. But like, and then you see people now jumping up weight class and they actually perform better because they're not depleted or they get more nutrition. Like, how much do you think? I mean, we all know that having a good diet is obviously...
Yeah, it's a massive thing, especially if you can make a weight division lower and you can do it safely. There's a lot of bad weight cutting, which I think would adversely affect the way that you fight, your gas tank, how you fight, how you perform. What I'm seeing now, working with Reed Reel, who's the head of nutrition at the Shanghai PI, is just the importance of having somebody who knows what they're talking about and prescribing the right kind of diet for the right person. And things like DEXA scans, just looking at how much fat-free mass you have and what percentage of your weight division you are. What are some of the safe tolerances to make weight divisions? Would have been great for me to know. When I first started fighting, I probably could have made lightweight had I adjusted a few things in my diet. I just never dieted, never really took anything seriously like that, and only had to cut 5 kilos. So I probably could have fought lightweight. It would have been a really hard cut. So am I better off staying upper weight and not worrying about it? Or am I better, and trying to put on some more lean mass and lift more weights and be a bit more lenient with the diet? Or are you better off just kind of dieting down? Some people are more receptive to it, some people aren't, and I think it's all individual and subjective to the person. In my opinion, you want to be the biggest you can for that weight division, and you're going to have a big advantage. Again, if you're making such a big cut that you're physically weak and you're no good for it, well then you're not in the right division. And safe to say, you shouldn't want to be cutting as a male over kind of 10% in fight week, and as a female maybe 8% of your fight weight. So I mean that's my opinion now. Back to you said it was 90% mental, 10% physical. I mean, I agree with that, but I don't agree with that in terms of how much time you dictate to doing one or the other. I think they're two different things. Obviously, you want to spend more time doing the skills and less time, doing yoga and mental stuff and mindfulness, but that's definitely a big part of it. And I think if you do not have the mental part in line, it doesn't matter how fit you are. I'd always say I'd rather my fighters be 10% less fit than they have to be, but mentally ready or mentally sharp, than as fit as they've ever been, but mentally depleted and feeling a little bit less confident. I mean,
confidence plays a huge part, right? I mean, like, and as they say, like, every fighter has to go in thinking that they're going to win, because if you go in going, this isn't a good matchup for me, you've lost.
Yeah,
like,
you have to be realistic. I mean, you want to be, this is my opinion, I'm only talking for myself, you want to be confident that you can win, but you need to know the risks. And there needs to be that element of, I'm going to win no matter what, and I want the fight to come to me. I think if you get too analytical, and this is probably something that I did, if you get too much into this could happen, that could happen, this could happen, that could happen, it's not a good kind of mental train of thought to go down. It's almost better to be brazen and a bit cavalier in your approach and be like, fuck yeah, I'm going to win. Like, I'm going to take the fight to you and I'm going to win, and I'm in a dogfight, I'm going to win, because I believe that's how you stay in that flow state of just fighting. If you start taking yourself back a little bit and thinking about the fight, I think you can't start to lose it.
I also think as well, for your opponent, when they see you wreak that confidence, sometimes it puts a little bit of a
It's
down
intimidating.
there. I mean, look at McGregor, for instance, right? Right at the beginning, just the way he came out and made a name for himself, but like,
he's the pinnacle of probably confidence in the sport.
Right? It was just crazy. He had that much self-belief that I think it kind of like, even when it was the Jose Aldo, right? Like, I kind of felt like that. I'm not saying Jose Aldo was scared of him or anything, but there was a little bit of doubt that started to creep in.
Just looking at the lead up to that fight, there's no doubt that would get in your head. Like, there's nothing you could do. If a guy is that confident and he's just constantly chipping away, it's going to have an effect. And I think that's what we saw with Conor. Like, his skills obviously matched his talk. His confidence and his competency were in line with each other. Maybe his confidence a little bit higher, but I mean, that's the kind of fruition of his hard work and believing in himself. I believe anyway, and he won the title. He won it in 2 divisions, and you're probably looking at one of the most accomplished fighters in the UFC. And people can say what they want to say, whether they like him or not as a person or as a fighter. I don't think anybody can say they don't like him as a fighter.
And he was a game changer.
Absolutely.
Straight up.
I guarantee
John Jones,
Ronda Rousey, him.
I guarantee you right now, you're probably wishing that he came about before you had your fighting career, because you probably put another couple of zeros behind you. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, he literally lifted the pay rise, I guess, for all fighters in a sense, right? Because before him, people weren't making that kind of money.
No, and I mean, I understand the importance of having personalities in the sport. There was, when I was fighting, there was Ronda and John Jones and these kind of big names and people who had personalities, especially with Ronda with the women. Bringing the standard of fighters up and bringing some kind of notoriety to women's MMA. And then Conor just coming across, and he was kind of bridging the gap between the mainstream audience and, you kind of weekend guys or your people who watch the UFC once a year to watching it weekly. And, I mean, there's a reason why the UFC is so popular in Australia and all around the world now, and that's because of big personalities like Conor kind of being that median between, or that vehicle between the general public and, rugby fans and non-fans to MMA fans, and that's the link, and that's better for the sport, because the more people that watch the UFC and understand the sport, ultimately the better it is for myself as a coach, for the fans, for everybody involved. And that's kind of that's how I feel about Conor McGregor and names like that. They're game changers.
I mean, 100%. I had Sam Goodman, who's a boxer, but same thing. He was like, dude, like, some of his press conferences are bigger than the fights, like, and that speaks volumes about his personality, right? But look, we'll get onto your life now. So basically, you had your stint in the UFC. Your last fight, what, 2017, 18?
2017. I mean, I think I was 27, turning 28. I'm 31 now, so I mean, yeah.
And now you're working for the PI in Shanghai.
Yep.
Are you a giant over there? Because are the people smaller over there?
Yes, they are, but not to say that they don't have their anomalies, and they've got 1 billion people, so there's certainly some big people that get thrown around in the mix, but your average person, yes, I'm taller than in China. So yeah, the UFC, I think it would have been almost 5 years ago now, opened the Performance Institute, 4 years ago, Performance Institute in Las Vegas, which is basically a hub of training for the rostered athletes. So if there's roughly 500 athletes in the UFC, they can use the Performance Institute as a place to train, get nutrition advice, sports science advice, strength and conditioning programs and advice, and also bring their team there to train. They have the full facilities, cryo chambers, cold pools, wrestling mats, you name it, it's there. It's the best facility.
Do they have the tanning bed?
I was looking for it. Look at me. I mean, it's basically the bee's knees of MMA and performance. I mean, what you see in other sports, in NFL, NBA, is these big, or even English Premier League, is these big training facilities, and nothing like this existed in mixed martial arts. It was simply, when I was training, it was, you go to your local gym who your jiu-jitsu coach or your boxing coach owns, and you train with your team, you put your fight camp together, and you hope for the best, and what you're doing is the right thing. The only relationship you have with the UFC is that you're in a independent contract and you fight for them and you get paid as an independent contractor. Everything else is on you. Your physio, your this, your that, your training, your diet. Now, the Performance Institute was an opportunity for the UFC to, kind of put their stamp on the sport, which they already had, but in a performance sense, and build a facility that's available to anybody on the roster where they can access, their needs in terms of what we just talked about, whether it be sports science, nutrition, rehab, anything, right? And it's an all-encompassing facility. A lot of people, if they're fighting in Vegas, or even if they're just fighting, you can bring your technical coaches there and train there. Now, fast forward a few years later, in 2019, the UFC wants to set up a hub in Shanghai, China, for Asia. So they built a $15 million US gym, which is where I work currently. There's the Asian office on one side for the Asian UFC, and on the other side there's a Performance Institute staff, and we kind of operate the lower level, which is an S&C section, and the upper level, which is a wrestling mat section, 2 cages, a boxing ring, everything's set up there for the Contender Series Asia, which was supposed to go ahead. Obviously with COVID, that didn't happen. But what's different between our facility and the one in the US is it's not just bigger and better, in my opinion. We actually have a professional team. So in Las Vegas, they don't focus on the technical skills. It's just everything else, all the auxiliary parts of mixed martial arts. We actually have technical coaches, myself and Dean Amasinger, who run a fight team there. So we have a professional fight team, which is Chinese athletes recruited from all over China, whether it be as far out as Tibet and Xinjiang, all the way east.
So does that mean you actually have people going to the PI that aren't currently signed? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
By having
So the idea of the academy athletes, which is what we're running, the first style of academy, is that we will recruit the best unsigned athletes from around China and put them in our facility, housing, food fully catered.
You house them?
We house them. We feed them. We have catering, international catering there, breakfast, lunch and dinner, full physio, sports science, strength and conditioning, technical coaching, you name it, the whole shebang. And we're also a hub for any Asian or any international UFC fighter that wants to come and join. So we have UFC rostered fighters in the facility, and we have the academy athletes.
Now, you brought up the Contender Series. So you're saying they're going to do one in Shanghai?
Correct. Yeah, correct. That was the initial plan, was to cultivate, roster these athletes from around Asia, and then bring up the standard of mixed martial arts in China, in the region, and then kind of put this talent on the Contender Series. Like, we're fighting them on domestic shows, cornering them, etc. And then once they're in the UFC, they're going to be UFC athletes. So obviously they'll be fighting in the big show. But the Contender Series was going to be that median to bring in these domestic level fighters into the big show and bringing and pitching it against international fighters from around the world in our facility having the show. I mean, everything's set up, the lighting, the rigs, the cage. So it's all good to go. I mean, it's going to be a massive, massive deal for Chinese MMA and Asia in general, really. Just having that hub of talent and building that up. And I mean, ultimately what we're trying to do there is on my side is bring up the standard of mixed martial arts in China and Asia and the region. And on a bigger side is make the popularity of the sport there bigger. You know, they've got Weili Zhang, who was actually at the facility for the last 2 months training. You know, and if we can build a few more Chinese
and
champions.
talking about size, she's big, right? Like for the women, like
she's strong. She's definitely at the in terms of testing, in strength and speed and power, she's at the top of the division. Yeah, so she's fit, strong, fast, and she's a quick learner. Scary woman.
Crazy.
Very nice lady.
And if you were to have your time again, like just now on the Contender, would you still like to go down the route of the Tough series, or do you prefer the Contender series? Because I kind of see like that's the replacement now, where it's like instead of spending all this time in a house and then fighting, you just go straight to the fight with your camp rather than being under these other coaches,
I
right?
would definitely think the Contender series is, and you've seen it with Jimmy Crute and, you know, in terms of Australian athletes, but I think it's a great opportunity because it is that kind of middle ground between you know, the big, you know, small domestic shows or whatever it is and the UFC. And I actually like the content. I like the idea of the show and, you know, get on this stage and prove yourself. And as a fighter, I don't like people doing anything they wouldn't do in a regular fight to try to get a contract. But I think that kind of hunger of, hey, if you win this fight, you know, and it's on the line, we get a contract, and Dana White being there, I think that is definitely more exciting.
So he would travel across for that Contender series? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, obviously with COVID-19, there's...
Well, at the moment, everything's on hold, but like
everything's on
typically speaking, if the, say once COVID finishes, the series goes ahead, he would actually fly across to be at the Contender series?
That was the original plan.
Nice. So I guess the last thing I kind of want to say, like how did you ending up over there even happen? Like what was it a thing that you knew was sort of in the works and you put your best foot forward, or did they approach you once you obviously...
Okay, so originally I was in Sydney coaching after I'd finished up fighting, and there was an opportunity to coach in China just for a 3-month stint at a jiu-jitsu gym, okay, and a mixed martial arts jiu-jitsu gym, and I took the opportunity just to go coach for 3 months, and that turned into almost a year, and I was planning on coming back to Australia. That was 2018, end of the year. I was planning on coming back to Australia. Before I finished up my contract there, I had someone contact me from the UFC Asia saying that they wanted to set up a meeting with Forrest Griffin. And actually, let me rewind even further. So when I first got to China...
You thought he wanted to fight you, right? He was coming back out of retirement
when I first got to China, a friend of mine, Uriah Faber, contacted me saying, hey, I'm involved in, you know, getting coaches for a new performance institute that's could be happening in China. Are you interested? Oh, this is kind of out of the blue. You know, I hadn't heard from Uriah for a while. And I said, yeah, sure, let's have a phone call. So we had a phone call, went for 40 minutes, and he kind of told me, hey, look, I'm looking for coaches. I'm helping the UFC out on a contractual basis or whatever it is, looking for coaches to go to China for their second installment of the Performance Institute. Is it something that you're interested in coaching? I said, yeah, of course, because, you know, I'm not going to say no to anything, and especially if Uriah Faber's calling me, telling me there's a good opportunity. So fast forward 8 months later, then I get a contact from somebody in the UFC Asia office, actually Peter Jung, who said, look, Forrest Griffin wants to have a chat to you. So anyway, this went on, had a phone call to Forrest. My phone kept dropping out because I wasn't even using the regular phone. I was using WeChat. And Forrest to this day still says, that nearly cost you a job. So he said to me, look, we're opening up a PI in China. You were recommended by Uriah Faber as somebody who'd been over there, training, and we know you coach and you got experience coaching and you've been in the UFC. Would you be interested in coming to Las Vegas for an interview? And I said, yeah, okay, let's do it. Now, I mean, I got nothing to lose, right? So at the end of the year, went over to Vegas for an interview, met the vice president of athletics, of the PI, Forrest Griffin, and did a little presentation to them about my methodology of coaching and how I would schedule and periodize a training camp and just basically my idea of what is MMA and how I would coach and how I coach. And part of that was actually doing a session for Forrest at a gym in Vegas. So he took me to Vegas and said, I want you to coach a session with some of these MMA fighters. So, and one of them was Jojo Calderwood in that class. So that was my interview. It was come over, present your kind of coaching style and how you do it, and coach a class. And then after that, I went thanks and flew back to Sydney and got a call from them, a month later saying, look, yeah, we want to bring you over to China. Are you interested? We'll start getting the contract together and work out what we can do. And at this stage, I didn't know who was coaching, who was, what role it was for, anything. Okay, so it turns out it was, the assistant coach to Dean Amersinger, who was Michael Bisping, one of Michael Bisping's coaches, and a guy with great experience. He's been in the Ultimate Fighter himself. He coached the Ultimate Fighter Smashers, Robert Whittaker's season. He was one of the coaches. He'd obviously had a lot of fights himself and experience, and also worked in rugby union, as a tackling coach for the English rugby team and in Japan. So he'd had a wealth of experience and a really, like, with a science background, he's quite a technical guy, and I've definitely learnt a lot from him on the side of programming and just general running sessions and coaching athletes, which is something that he's got a great deal of experience and learnt a lot over the last 10 years himself coaching. And then for me to learn off him, it's almost expedited. Every day I'm learning bits and pieces off everybody.
Now, is it a lot of sign language over there, or do you speak Chinese, or how does that all work?
I'd like to say I speak Chinese well, but I don't. I speak a little bit, and we have a translator. So I have a translator, Eddie, who's also a jiu-jitsu
At every
coach.
session?
Every session, I have a guy called Eddie, and Eddie is actually a jiu-jitsu coach as well, speaks English, and he's translating. So what I say, I try to keep it succinct. My coaching style has been, adapted. There's not this long-winded, when you go to a jiu-jitsu class and you got to grab the lapel, you got to use your third index finger here and caress his arm. There's not so much of that. It's these guys are already at a high level of...
It's to the point.
To the point. We have a lot of high-level wrestlers who've wrestled for China or Mongolia, people with a lot of experience already. So I don't need to give the basics. I need to show the technique we're doing, break it down as simple as I can, let them try it, and I'll always bring them back in minutes later and then give the finer details. So that's been interesting, coaching in English under translation. As you can imagine, you've got to be to the point because the message is getting translated, so it's double the time. I can't be sitting there just fluffing about.
And has anything ever been lost in translation?
Yeah, maybe. I don't think so, because they're probably the best athletes that I've coached in terms of wanting to learn and then applying the skills. And, not so much to their detriment, but they're very much, any questions? No questions ever. It's just, we do as you say, you're the coach. This is how I do it. They'll do it exactly the same way. So what I've been trying to, which I don't have, I find with general Chinese population in terms of coaching, it's hard to get that lateral thinking and to get them to think outside the box. But I don't find that with mixed martial artists and Chinese fighters, because as an MMA fighter, you've got to be kind of creative, and I feel like you've got to go against the grain to some point. So you get a lot of creative minds in MMA, and for me, keeping it simple, keeping the techniques that I'm showing simple, allows them to then put their creative flair on top. And I've found them to be the best, to coach. They listen, they learn, they want to train hard, they do train hard, they do everything you say. So it's they're not robots, but they're as close as you can get. I think that, growing up in China makes them a little bit tough.
And when are you looking at going back? Like, obviously, once again, there's a pandemic, there's border restrictions at the moment, but have they given you kind of a time frame of you going back now?
Yeah, well, the gym's been operational for a month, so the fighters are back. There's fights going on in China. I'm looking to get back probably in a month to 6 weeks. I have a visa for China. It's just a matter of sorting out... I have a invitation letter back to China. It's just a matter of sorting out the visa and getting a time to do that. And then booking flights and getting back over. But obviously with everything in storage over there, and my wife and little baby.
She's not in storage, right?
I hope not. She'll kick my ass. So I'll be heading back to China probably in the next 6 weeks and definitely do a stint by myself over there. But I want to get back to work.
And then hopefully come back once the diaper changes are finished, right? That's when you'll be coming back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the moment, I need an extra set of arms here. The amount of nappies I'm bloody changing, but it's been a real good opportunity. In light of the COVID and not being able to be at work and coach, has given me time, as a dad and help out, my wife and get up at 2 a.m. and have a screaming baby.
Hey, you had 9 months to prepare yourself. So
I know. I mean, but like again, I think that's more to do with the woman. You know, the hormones are happening with them. Everything's happening to them. You're just kind of standing there like a tit, like, you know, until the baby's there screaming. It wasn't necessarily real. But back on the China thing, I think I'll go back as soon as possible. You know, obviously bring the wife and baby over when that's safe and when people can travel again. But, you know, the idea was to get as many people in the UFC as possible out of the academy athletes. So I want to graduate them into the Contender Series and then into the UFC, and not just get them there for 1 to 2 fights and then, you know, they'd be cut. We want to get people in the UFC who are going to stay there, who are going to be names, who are going to kind of build the sport up for China and eventually the whole Asian region, you know, as the gym gets bigger and we recruit more and more athletes. So it's really the first of its kind, in-house, you know, from go to woe in terms of bringing professionals in and keeping them there as stable of fighters and trying to get as many in the UFC as we can. So my goal ultimately would be to have, you know, a champion come through, work with them myself, and then get them to the UFC level as a champion. But the company's goals, again, is, you know, making as many UFC fighters as we can and keep the sport growing.
Well, that's it. And I think what will happen, we had the Tough Smashers, Tough Nations, and now we'll go to Tough PI, which will be you and Forrest Griffin against each other. And we'll see how that all works out. But listen, we're probably going to finish up about now. We're running a little over. But before I do, I want to get a few fight tips out of you. Or before we do fight tips, the first one, I guess, is Stipe right now. The conversation was obviously...
John?
Well, first Francis was guaranteed that spot, right?
Yeah.
And like he had earned it again, but we've seen that fight. Now John's making that case. We've seen this fight. You know, does it make so much sense? In your eyes, do you think it is better for us to do the Francis Stipe and John get the winner of that, where John has already said, well, if Stipe loses that cancels out that fight, where if, you know, John and Stipe fought right now, it would be the ultimate super fight? Or do you...
I think if John and Stipe fought, I think John would win. Like, this is my opinion. I think John would win. What I would like to see is Francis and Stipe, and I think Francis would win. And I'd love to see John Jones try and fight Francis.
So you think that Francis has got... Because Stipe kind of had his number, right, with the wrestling the last time out. You think that Francis will be able to nullify that now? I do, because I think that he hadn't been in the sport long enough. I don't think his experience was enough. And since then, I know he'd been working with the PI over in Vegas on his energy systems and just how to kind of get on top of that. And I'd like to hope that he's improved in, how long has it been since he fought him? A year or two? 2 years? 2 years? I'd like to think that he's improved a lot, because he'd only been in the sport for 4 or 5 years at that stage. You know, and Stipe being where he's at and the amount of, you know, kilometers or miles that he's got on his clock, I feel like it's just ripe for Francis to come in and kind of have that second showdown and take the belt. That's my opinion. But, you know, I've been wrong in more of these than I've been right. So I'm not a betting man. Now, I don't want to get you into trouble, so I don't really want to mention another organisation, but there's a fight with our Aussie hopefully fighting Chris Cyborg, right, which is Arlene.
Yeah, we can talk about it. That's fine.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, how do you see that fight? Like, obviously, I take it you'd be vouching for the Aussie.
Of course.
And
look, I have no idea because, you know, again, with Cyborg, again, having some tough fights in the UFC and then making your way back to Bellator, I think that's anyone's fight. And obviously, I'm always going to back the Aussie. So I'd like to see, you know, the Aussie win and get on top.
All right, and now back to the UFC.
You really put me on the spot there. Like, you want the Aussie to win? Or Chris? Look, Cyborg's a hard fight for anybody. Cyborg's a hard fight for any man or woman.
Well, yeah, but on that token, I kind of say she's like the Ronda Rousey, right? That for a long... I mean, Conor McGregor was the same. For this long period of time, it was like they were untouchable, right? And you got that aura around them, right? Once that's broken... You don't know, and that's the thing. Like, yes, Cyborg was this unbeatable monster, but then Nunes showed
and just
right and walked through her.
Absolutely, and same with Rousey as well.
Rousey the same. Holly Holm showed, kind of like, this is the way you can beat her, keep it on the feet and da-da-da-da. And then it kind of went downhill from there. But so I'm actually really interested to see that fight, right? Like,
I've actually got to catch up on both of their last fights and just, to really get a good idea of. I'm not a betting man, and I would really not recommend myself putting any bets on any fights because, like I said, I've been wrong more than I've been right.
But now I'm going to put you on the spot as well, since you say you'll always back the Aussie. Staying with the women.
Who?
Megan Anderson.
Who's she fighting?
Amanda Nunes.
Oh, that's a big fight.
That's a big fight.
Yeah, because I know Megan Anderson's had her ups and downs in terms of fights. I mean, how do you bet against Amanda Nunes? I mean, I haven't seen...
Well, I don't know. You were just saying that you'd never bet against the Aussie. So that
I'm not betting, though. I'm not betting. I mean, I'm just saying that's a tough fight. I mean, a really tough fight. I mean, if anything that I can give the advantage to the Aussie is just the height advantage, potentially. 6 foot, yeah? She's 183 centimetres. I mean, if she can effectively use that range, which I've seen in the last fight, using that range, she'll do well. But, I mean, Nunes hits like a truck. I mean, this is a tough fight. I mean, she's definitely, from what I've seen in the division, leaps and bounds above the technical prowess of anybody else in terms of putting the game together. I mean, she just keeps getting better and better. She's a true mixed martial artist. She's well-rounded. She's tough. I mean, she's a tough champion to dethrone. I'm not gonna put money on anyone on that one. Obviously, I'd like to see the Aussie win.
And an interesting thing about that was Ariel Helwani brought up that apparently with Megan, it's the last fight of her contract, and usually he was saying that when you fight for a title, they'll usually try to up your contract before you go into it, but they haven't done that this time. So he's kind of saying that if Nunes wins this fight, they're probably going to squash that division. Mm-hmm. Where if Megan pulls off the upset, that there's a clause of some sort that if you win the champion, you get another 3 fights on there. There's an actual clause, and that's what he's saying. That's why they haven't extended it. So if Megan wins, they'll keep the division. If she loses, they'll probably squash that division, which, once again, this is his...
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about them squashing that division. There was similar chat with the 125 men's division, but it seems like there's some good fighters now cropping up in that division, so it looks like it's there to stay. I mean, yeah, there's always been talk about that, but I can't speak from it. I literally have no idea. Ariel probably has as good idea as anyone else in terms of that.
And how's he getting to these contracts anyway, right? And now a non-title fight, and I just want to get your opinion on it. Uriah Hall has finally got a fight, right? Like he's probably had the worst luck out of anyone with just fights not coming
his way, not coming to fruition.
Right. Yeah. But he's now taking on the great Anderson Silva, which is possibly going to be Anderson's retirement fight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Anderson's been going longer than I think a lot of us gave him credit for. And, yeah, I mean, that's a tough one to pick. I mean, that is a really tough one to pick. I mean, at one stage, Anderson was the GOAT. He's still probably up there in the top, 2 or 3 best fighters of all time in mixed martial arts. And he hasn't disgraced himself. When some people kind of lose it towards the end of their career and start losing a lot of fights, and they kind of go out looking, not like they used to be. In terms of, I think this is a good fight for him to finish on. I think it's winnable for him, especially against Uriah Hall, because I feel as though Uriah Hall is somebody who gets to the top kind of fights and hasn't gone as well as he'd probably like to. So I think for Anderson, it's going to be a good striking battle and should be an exciting fight. I'll definitely be interested to see that one. It's a little bit like when Anderson fought Adesanya. Yeah, Izzy. Everybody thought that Izzy was just going to walk through him, but he didn't. He kind of showed that he still had a bit of class and definitely on the feet is still dangerous. So I'm going to back Anderson Silva on this one.
No, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it isn't a title fight, but I think it's a good fight.
I think it's a good exciting fight for his last fight.
And just stylistically, I think it's going to be like, as you said, the Izzy fight. I think it's going to be a very entertaining fight. Now we'll go to the last 2 title fights.
You're really putting me on the spot here.
Right? So we got Khabib versus Justin.
Yep, Justin Gaethje versus Khabib.
Yep. How do you see that one?
Man, I mean, after watch, I would have thought that nobody will come close to Khabib, but after seeing Gaethje's last fight, I think if anybody can take it from him, he's the man. I did say Ferguson. I said this last time. I said Ferguson, is the guy who's going to take it from Khabib. But I see Justin being that guy now. I think if he can defend the takedowns and he can start putting some hands on him, it's going to change the whole course of events of that fight.
And look, Justin's got a good wrestling background as well.
Absolutely. So. And I think he's up to the task. I mean, his skill set, his power, his endurance is more than enough to win that fight. So I'm backing him in that one.
Nice. And then last but not least, Izzy versus Costa.
By the way, in that last fight, I mean, I'm backing a guy, I'm backing against a guy who's never lost. I mean, I don't think Khabib's ever lost, has he?
No.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
And he's planning on retiring undefeated, right? He wants to be the Floyd of MMA.
Yeah. Look, I'm gonna go against him on that one. And with the last one, you're saying Izzy and Costa.
Izzy and Costa.
Ooh, that's a big one.
I mean, most people have said it's going to be the Yoel versus Izzy, except Costa's actually going to force the action where Yoel kind of sat back. So you've got that power.
I thought Yoel was looking like very dangerous. To me, it looked like Izzy didn't want to engage. In terms of with Romero, I thought Romero was a little bit more there to fight, but he wanted Izzy to bring the fight to him, and I think when Izzy felt that power, he wasn't going to engage. In this fight, I see Costa being a little bit different. I see him just coming forward and just swinging, and he's going to, it's going to be fireworks. That's all I can say. But my opinion is this.
Izzy's a good counter striker, though.
He's a good counter striker, but I feel like if Costa can mug him and put hands on him early, he could really hurt him. Whether he can finish him, I don't know. I see Izzy being good off the back foot, so if Costa comes forward, it's going to be good for Izzy. So what I see is that this is going to go later round fight, and Izzy's going to be winning on the back foot because I think he's too sharp, he's too good on the back foot, and you're going to see him touch him a lot, use a lot of kicks, keep it distance, give respect to Costa's power in the first 2-3 rounds, and then you'll see him start to land the more accurate shots in the later rounds. That's how I see that going.
Nice. Well, I guess that is it. I've got no more tough questions for you.
Okay.
Just, I guess, what I always give every guest is the opportunity to just let everyone know if people want to reach out to you, whether it's on a personal, whether it's to get some training tips, or I guess even as you say now with the fight team, like if you got people out there and like, is there tryouts to the fight team or like, so if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to get to you?
Yeah, if anybody out there who's listening wants to reach out, probably just message me on Instagram at RichUFC. I'll shoot you back a message. Might be a couple of days later as we find out. But that's probably the best way to contact me. And I'm happy to pitch any questions on training, any general advice, or if anybody's looking for any sessions while I'm in town, seminars, coaching sessions, just let me know. Drop me a line. And thanks for having me on.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I have to say, like, I really respect your honesty and especially about you taking a couple of days to get back. But no, look, I really do appreciate the time, especially knowing that you've just had the kid and all the things that come with it. And, your time in Sydney at the moment is limited before you go back. So, thank you so much. And on that note, we will call it quits.
I'm a one.